what they never told you about the Chinese space program. What if I told you that, within a few decades, the United States could lose its throne as a space power? What until now seemed unthinkable is happening, and you won't see it in the main headlines. In this video from Astounding Space, we will discover how China, a nation that half a century ago struggled to feed its people, has become NASA's greatest rival. Stay until the end, because what comes next is not science fiction, but history in the making. The awakening of a sleeping giant. The Chinese space program was not born from a collective dream, but from a political necessity. In the mid-20th century, China was far from being a technological power. When Mao Zedong founded the People's Republic in 1949, the country was a sleeping giant, backward, rural, and with an almost non-existent scientific infrastructure. While the Cold War pushed the United States and the Soviet Union toward space conquest, China was barely taking its first steps to survive as a modern nation. The Great Leap Forward campaign, launched in the late 50s, sought to industrialize the country at a forced pace. The result was an economic and humanitarian collapse. Millions of people died of hunger, and the scientific system was dismantled. That experiment left deep scars on the country's ability to generate its own technology. During the Cultural Revolution, knowledge was persecuted as an enemy of the people. Scientists were humiliated, imprisoned, or even executed. Science became a bourgeois luxury. And yet, against all odds, China launched its first rocket in 1960 with basic Soviet technology. Soon after, the break with Moscow left China alone, forced to develop its space program from scratch. It was then, at the end of the 70s, that a decisive figure emerged, Deng Xiaoping. With him came deep economic reforms, opening to the world, and a strategic vision for science. Under his leadership, the country stopped seeing space as propaganda and began treating it as a future investment. Thus, a new era was born, and though silently, the giant began to move. From stragglers to lunar pioneers. From the 1980s onwards, China began an unprecedented economic rise. Thanks to the reforms pushed by Deng Xiaoping, the country went from being an impoverished agricultural economy to becoming an industrial superpower. In just over 4 decades, its share in the world's gross domestic product multiplied, and with it, the financial muscle to undertake large-scale scientific projects. Among them, one stood out above the rest: outer space. With a long-term vision and a state willing to invest, China started allocating more resources than ever to its space program. Although the United States still led spending, the Asian country quickly rose to second place worldwide in space technology investment. And with that push, the dream of reaching the moon stopped being a symbol of the past and became a national goal. The Chang'e project, named after the Chinese goddess of the moon, marked the start of a series of carefully planned missions. In 2007, Chang'e 1 successfully orbited our satellite and mapped its surface. It was only the beginning. In 2013, Chang'e 3 achieved what only 2 countries had done before, a soft landing on the lunar surface. But China was not content with being third. In 2019, Chang'e 4 made history, the first controlled landing on the far side of the moon, an unknown and hostile region, without direct communication with Earth. To achieve this, an intermediary probe was used that bounced signals between the module and our planet. The operation was a resounding success, and it did not come alone. Inside the lunar module traveled a small revolutionary experiment, a mini biosphere with seeds, fruit fly eggs, air, and soil. Some seeds germinated, becoming the first plants to sprout outside Earth, although their life was brief. Later, with the Chang'e 5 and 6 missions, China managed to bring lunar samples home, something very few have achieved. But behind these scientific achievements lies a much more ambitious vision. China does not just want to study the moon, it wants to establish a permanent presence. Because whoever controls the moon can control the future of space exploration, Mars, alliances, and global competition. While the world watched NASA's sophisticated Perseverance rover roam Mars, China was preparing its own assault on the Red Planet. In 2021, the rover Zhurong, part of the Tianwen 1 mission, successfully landed on Martian soil, marking an extraordinary milestone. It was not only China's first attempt to reach Mars, but also included orbiting, landing, and deployment in a single mission. A triple technical leap that only the United States had achieved before. What is most striking is how they managed it. With a fraction of NASA's budget, the Chinese space program proved that an astronomical checkbook is not necessary to achieve ambitious goals. While the West tends to outsource functions and depend on the private sector, China continues to bet on a highly coordinated state structure. Less show, more results. And this is not limited to Mars alone. China is building a network of alliances to consolidate its space presence. One of the most strategic projects is the ILRS, the International Lunar Research Station. This initiative, led alongside Russia, aims to create a permanent scientific base on the lunar surface or in orbit. Unlike the closed style of some powers, China has extended invitations to countries like Egypt, Venezuela, South Africa, and other African nations. A clear bet for a new multipolar space order. Europe, although cautious, has shown some interest in collaborating with China on scientific matters. However, relations are marked by diplomatic tensions, especially due to U.S. pressure. Since the approval of the Wolf Amendment, the United States prohibits almost all collaboration between NASA and Chinese agencies. This exclusion policy has also turned the Artemis program, the U.S. plan to return to the moon, into a geopolitical tool. Meanwhile, China does not stop. Its government has outlined a long-term space strategy extending into the mid-21st century. It includes lunar bases, stations on Mars, and the eventual exploitation of extraterrestrial resources. It is not just about science, it is about global positioning. On the cosmic board, China does not want to play defense. It wants to write the rules of the game. A future with the Chinese flag in the cosmos. China does not want to settle for being just another actor in space. Its plans for 2045 are so ambitious they border on science fiction. The goal is clear: to lead the future of the cosmos. This implies establishing a permanent lunar station, exploiting asteroid minerals, and creating self-sufficient colonies that do not depend on Earth. Science, technology, and strategy all at the service of a new kind of power. But it is not only about conquering planets. Orbital dominance is another key front. China is already working on satellite networks to control global telecommunications, boost its Beidou navigation system, and strengthen its space defense. In other words, it wants its satellites not only to see the world, but to manage it. A future with the Chinese flag in the cosmos is not a futuristic concept. It is a plan underway, and the most unsettling part is that it is being executed with surgical precision. While NASA struggles with legislative budgets, increasingly delayed deadlines, and alliances requiring complex consensus, China advances alone, without political distractions, and with a roadmap defined until 2045. The goal? To dominate not only near space but also the economic, scientific, and symbolic domains. The construction of its own Tiangong space station is just one example of this technological independence. In just a few years, China has assembled and launched an inhabited platform that already functions as an advanced research laboratory, proving it does not need the International Space Station to continue growing. While some countries debate their exit from the ISS project, China already thinks about its next generation of orbital stations and scientific cooperation with emerging countries. But the most worrying for its competitors is not what is visible, but what is projected in the long term. Planned missions to capture asteroids, study comets, or establish lunar mines are not mere displays of power. They are part of a deeper strategy to guarantee priority access to the solar system's resources. Helium-3, frozen water, rare minerals, everything is on the table. Because in the future, whoever controls these materials will control the space economy, and possibly the Earth economy. Also, the narrative matters. China is rewriting its story as a space civilization. It no longer wants to be seen as the nation that copies, but as the one that leads. And it is doing so with its own approach, where media silence contrasts with concrete results. While the Western world focuses on figures like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, China builds its hegemony from the state, with meticulous planning and no need for spectacle. Perhaps the most impressive thing is that all this has been achieved without depending on external technological powers. From its Long March rockets to its own satellite positioning system, China has built a national space infrastructure that reduces its vulnerability to blockades or sanctions, pure self-sufficiency. And that completely changes the rules of the game. Of course, this rise is not without criticism. The transparency of their programs, the lack of open collaboration, and the strategic use of space technology to reinforce their military power are all questioned. But at the same time, it is undeniable that China is expanding access to space for many countries that were previously off the map. It offers them a new model, a new way to participate in the conquest of the cosmos. Because in the end, space is no longer just a stage for science. It is a ground where global leadership is contested. And if the Chinese space program has taught us anything, it is that those who work in silence often arrive first. And here comes the big question. How does the global balance change if leadership in space ceases to be in Western hands? For decades, the United States was the undisputed power, with Europe as a technological ally. But now, a new space order is emerging, more fragmented, more competitive, and more unpredictable. The new space race is not fought only with rockets, but with influence, diplomacy, and scientific capacity. Will the West be able to reinvent itself, or will it yield ground to the Chinese model? Are we witnessing the dawn of a new hegemony, this time beyond the atmosphere? What do you think? Does this scenario seem inspiring or unsettling to you? Leave us your thoughts in the comments, share this video if it made you think, and don't forget to subscribe to Mind Blown Space, where we explore what no one dares to tell about the universe.